Oh, hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe here, and I'm just here at Endagala in the forest, back here again, and thought to record a short Dhamma discussion for the internet. So I thought that could start with just a little meditation, so can lean forward a bit and arch the spine, and look about 3 feet in front, and close our eyes. And can focus in on the breath. Can know when it's coming in, and know when it's going out. If one breathes in a long breath, can just know I'm breathing in a long breath. And if one breathes in a short breath, can just know I'm breathing in a short breath. And can focus in on the breath at the tip of the nose. And if notice any patterns of tension or tightness around the nose, around the face, can just let those relax. And can relax any tensions that one might feel in the body. And can let awareness spread from the tip of the nose until it fills one's whole body. And one of the metaphors they give for spreading feelings through the body in the canon is like a lake with an underground source. And the water comes up from the underground source and fills the whole lake. In the same way, similar way, one can let awareness spread until it fills one's whole body. And with awareness filling the whole body, one can practice whole body breathing. And when practicing whole body breathing, can be good for one to change one's perception of the breath, so that it's not just air that one is pulling in and out of the lungs, but it's a kind of energy that's all around and coursing through the body. And it's possible to pull it into and out of every pore. Almost like the body was a big sponge. So on the in-breath, one can think whole body. On the out-breath, one can think whole body. And before we finish meditating, can spread thoughts of goodwill, wishing may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease, May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make the mind infinite, can make it unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond, in every dimension. May all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. And can open our eyes and do a short Dhamma discussion for the internet. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Saṅghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Saṅghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Saṅghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. So had gotten an email from a friend in Vancouver, Marcelo Lince, and he'd asked him if he had any questions that he'd like to see videos about, and he wrote back with a question about dependent origination. So he said, dependent origination is very complicated, maybe hard to explain the whole thing, but could you explain the portion with feeling, I think it was perception, just the kind of the basic portion. Can't remember the question verbatim. So dependent origination is the Buddha's teachings. Basically, it describes like a link-by-link process almost through which rebirth takes place. So it starts with conscious. There's different formulations of it. It's kind of not just one way that the Buddha formulates dependent origination, but maybe the time he explains it the most thoroughly is in a sutta which is called the Mahanidana Sutta, which means the kind of great links, or one might say like the great discourse on causation. That's how it's translated by Ajahn Thanissaro. So this dependent origination starts with consciousness, and kind of from consciousness as a condition you get what they call name and form. And from name and form as a condition, you get contact. From contact as a condition, you get feeling. From feeling as a condition, you get craving. From craving as a condition, you get clinging. From clinging as a condition, you get becoming. From becoming as a condition, you get birth. And from birth as a condition, you get aging, sickness, and death. So this is what one might say a very kind of complicated teaching, kind of complicated in the sense that it covers a lot of things and can be used in many different ways. It's a very multifaceted topic for contemplation that the Buddha gave. And throughout the centuries there's been kind of many debates on precisely what the formula means. These kind of debates kind of tend to revolve around, does it just describe this life, does it describe other lives as well? So in the Mahanidana Sutta, the Buddha basically he goes through what one might say is one life. You have name and form together with consciousness. So he says these two things, name and form and consciousness together, these are basically what describe all of reality. So it actually asked Ñāṇadeepa Bhante about this when he was here, and he said one doesn't just have to think about name and form and consciousness as kind of separate things. Another word for it is bhuta, which means what has come to be. So kind of all of reality can be encompassed in these two things, what they call name and form and consciousness. Name and form is basically physical form, and name, there's one sutta which basically describes it as perception, Is it perception, intention, attention, contact, and feeling? And this kind of discussion is getting a little bit technical, but these are kind of a shorthand, I guess one might say. One kind of can take these as a kind of shorthand for the four non-physical aggregates and the five aggregates for feeling, perception, sankharas, mental formations, feeling, perception, mental formations, and not consciousness. And then form is there for rupa, with consciousness separate. Now these things are supposed to depend on, name and form depend on consciousness, because the Buddha describes if consciousness weren't to descend into a mother's womb, basically when something's between births, it's sustained by a type of craving. And they call this kind of consciousness, it's sustained by a type of craving. And this consciousness kind of originates dependent on, they call name and form. They kind of both lean against each other. But when it's traveling, it's sustained by this kind of subtle type of name. Some argue there's also a subtle type of form there. And then it descends into the mother's womb. And there's a new type of name and form. And the kind of consciousness as well is always changing. It's not a static thing, and neither is name and form. So consciousness is this knowing aspect. Name and form are the physical aspects and mental properties, one could say, as a shorthand. And so if consciousness didn't descend into the mother's womb, then this name and form, kind of these physical properties, these kind of internal faculties, one might say, they wouldn't develop. This seed has to descend into the mother's womb. So once they develop, once name and form develops, then one can experience contact with the outside world. So they describe kind of the name elements, kind of basically these kind of non-physical elements. One is able to perceive external forms because of what they call resistance contact. And that basically means that things that are external to one are kind of, they give off this resistance. This is the way Jnanadeepa Bhante described it, which was excellent. You kind of, if you look at a chair, look at this rock, then we can't just make it into whatever we want. It has this element of resistance to it. So because it resists our efforts to make it what we want, one can perceive it using the sense faculties. And with regards to form, basically one couldn't perceive it if it didn't have this designation contact coming from name. So one couldn't, even though the form, this rock might be there, if there wasn't this kind of contact through these internal sense faculties, there wasn't this ability of these internal sense faculties to label, one wouldn't be able to perceive it at all. So contact depends on these two things, both like physical contact, the physical elements of whatever it is externally is one way one can look at it. Also the internal ability to perceive. That's what lets people contact these external world. When one contacts this external world, feelings arise. It kind of can be a happy feeling, an unhappy feeling, neutral. So I see this rock, it's basically a neutral feeling. Actually, I like ancient ruins, so might be a happy feeling. And based on these kind of feelings, one gets kind of craving. Kind of either one craves for it to, one may crave for it to be different, one might crave for it to be more, one might crave for it to stay the same. And there's always this kind of subtle background craving that comes. So this craving comes up, and there's clinging. And kind of one sees something one likes, like I like this forest, there's a lovely forest here. Crave for that forest to be the same, cling to that. And because of this craving and clinging, there's becoming. And one becomes a person who likes the forest. The more one practices this, then the more that this becomes a part of one's character, it becomes a part of one's habits. It becomes a part of the way that one's mind operates. Based on this kind of habits, these characters that a person develops, one develops an inclination in the mind. And the Buddha describes this as an inclination either towards sensuality, the kind of sensual realm, a kind of, I think it was the sensual realm, form, or the formless realm. This kind of form realm is a higher heaven, and the formless realm is an even higher heaven, and kind of based on the mental abilities of that person. The kind of sensual realm can include lower realms like hell, the animal realm, also higher heavens, and also the human realm. But the higher ones are this Brahma realm and these other realms. So one develops this kind of character in one's mind, and on the basis of this character, one gets this kind of becoming. One becomes this kind of person like this. And on the stream of becoming, when one passes away, it's this kind of craving, and this stream of becoming that sustains consciousness and drives it to its next rebirth. And then as a result, one gets birth. And then as a result of birth, one gets aging, sickness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. So this is where the whole mass of suffering comes from. And this is Buddha's description on how suffering arises. And basically it arises from birth, with birth as a condition. And one is born into a realm. If one is not born, then no suffering arises. So in terms of breaking the chain, there's this chain of dependent origination, and one wants to break the chain so that there's no further rebirth, so that one doesn't experience rebirth anymore. And there's one sutta, I actually didn't have a chance to look it up, I read it a long time ago, where I think Venerable Sariputta, he goes through and describes how basically at any link the chain can be broken. But the most common is when people describe these links of craving, clinging, feeling, craving, clinging, and becoming. This is the one that will operate the most often in one's daily life, kind of. One will notice a sound, notice a sight, notice a taste, whatever it might be. As a result, one craves for that. As a result, one clings to that. As a result, one becomes that. So when one takes up an object of meditation, takes up an object aimed at overcoming this kind of grosser levels of craving, grosser levels of clinging, and elevating them to higher levels of craving, higher levels of clinging, and basically letting go, destroying this kind of becoming that one has, this kind of attachment one has. When one, say, takes up an object of meditation like contemplation of the body, then one learns to develop this kind of dispassion towards one's own body. One learns to develop dispassion towards the idea that the body might be oneself. One kind of might truly be who one is. One can see it kind of changing, altering all the time. As a result of this, one develops dispassion towards the body, and this cuts the link between craving and clinging. When this link is cut, then becoming ceases as well. One ceases to become with regards to the body. If one becomes really skilled at this, if one is able to completely cut one's craving and clinging towards the body, one becomes what's called a non-returner. And as a result, one no longer develops the habits of mind, the stream in one's mind, which lead to becoming as a human being or a lower deva or any of the animals. One after that is only born to what's called the form realms. One has no more attachment to a physical body or to the material world. And as a result, one is no longer born there. So that's an example, just kind of very quick and gross example of how one, through the practice of meditation, through the practice of the Dhamma that the Buddha recommends, primarily through meditation, but also obviously through the other ones, obviously through generosity, obviously through keeping the precepts. All of these interlink. In all of these things, when one is practicing the precepts, also one is cutting one's craving and clinging towards grosser aspects of sensuality. And this cuts one's becoming, these kind of gross aspects of sensuality that one might undertake, say like killing or stealing, lying. These things one undertakes for the sake of some sensual desire. And this stream, this mental stream of becoming that comes from that, is the mental stream that leads one to become as an animal, become as a hungry ghost, become as somebody who's born in hell. And that kind of stream, together with craving, takes one to birth in these realms, where one suffers or feels pleasure and pain according to the way that one is born, where one is born. So even keeping the precepts, one is cutting this stream between craving and clinging. One is cutting the stream between craving for these bad things, these gross things, breaking the precepts, and clinging to them. Kind of so one changes one's craving, one cuts it, one cuts clinging, becoming as well. So this is also the case for generosity, but no need to go over those. So when one practices basically this threefold training that the Buddha undertakes, sila, samadhi, panya, or undertakes the three types of meritorious actions, and basically all the types of Buddhist training, what one is doing is cutting this link between craving and clinging, and then further becoming. One is changing the type of becoming that one has, elevating it higher and higher. And this is the process through which one develops one's mind towards what they call the noble, towards what one might call the noble attainments. So one of the interesting aspects of the dependent origination is that there's actually a sutta where Venerable Sariputta says that name and form, perception, I think consciousness, perception, and intention. I can't remember. There's basically three, but it goes through. It's kind of consciousness is linked to consciousness, perception, and feeling. These things are linked. They're kind of these. One can't separate them, although they all have different names: consciousness, feeling, perception. Because whatever one feels, that one perceives. Whatever one perceives, that one cognizes. This is what he says. So although there's different names for these things, in reality, this dependent origination can be kind of more of a unified stream of experience. Although one can break it up into these different blocks. It's kind of all of experience, all of reality can kind of run together. So what this means is that to use this kind of dependent origination formula well, to use it properly, one wants to use it in line with the Buddha's instructions, basically to develop dispassion. And one can use it as a topic of meditation for developing the idea of not self, developing the perception of not self. Kind of consciousness is not myself because it's dependent on name and form. Kind of one goes through and learns to view reality in this way, instead of seeing consciousness as something that's kind of constant, or seeing kind of pleasant feeling as something that's constant, or seeing one's character and becoming as something that's constant. One learns to contemplate these links to see how it's not oneself. One can also contemplate them in terms of impermanence. One can see that basically everything that's come to be is dependent. All of one's perceptions, all of whatever it is that makes up one's reality, whatever it makes up one's birth, whatever it is that makes up one's death, all these things are dependent on other things. And when they change, everything changes as well. There's kind of it's not something permanent here in samsara that one can rely on. And so with this, one cultivates his perception of impermanence. And one can also use dependent origination to cultivate the perception of suffering and what's impermanent. And kind of everything that changes is going to cause me to suffer if I cling to it. I have this contact, I have name and form, I have consciousness, so this is my reality. This is my entire world made up of these things which depend on each other. And because of these things, I basically can contact the world. When this contact arises, I have a feeling. This feeling is pleasant, then I want more of it. I cling to it, I crave for it, I cling to it, I become based on that. Based on that becoming, I'm born. I get born as a human, get born as a Brahma, get born as an animal, whatever it might be, and I'm suffering because of this, because of clinging. Whatever I cling to, it changes. So through this kind of cultivation of dependent origination, then one can develop dispassion for this process of becoming, through this process of dependent origination. And as Venerable Sariputta, as far as I remember from that sutta, he describes it can occur at any one of these links. So if one is contemplating in this way, then if one becomes dispassionate towards consciousness, and contemplating how it's dependent on name and form, or name and form dependent on how it's consciousness, all these things tend to link together. And because they link, it's like breaking. Like breaking. Maybe not a chain is the right word. Well, I guess chain could be some chain that's binding two things together. When one breaks a link, then it breaks the hold of the chain. But this is actually even a bit more than that, because it also breaks the other elements in the chain as well. It'd be like one breaking one link in a chain, and all the rest of the links break as a result, because they're all dependent on one another. So this dependent origination, because it can be thought of as almost like a stream of reality, kind of with these things that are interlinked, when one breaks one link, the rest of them can fall away as well. But this is this is something that this topic of dependent origination, practically speaking, is often, it's not often, doesn't mean that it can't be, it's just not often one that I've personally heard that people will take up, usually in the preliminary portions of their practice. In the practices of the kind of Thai meditation masters, usually they will take up the body or grosser elements for contemplation. In the beginning stages of their practice, one can take up the 5 khandhas. One can also take this up, dependent origination. But it's when one has cut one's attachment to the body, cut one's attachment to almost everything else, and basically only the mental components remain. That's when one's methods of investigation have become too subtle to use things like the body as an object for investigation. And it's then when, say, the Thai Kruba Ajahns, at least the way they describe their practice, my perceptions of the way they describe it, sounds like they're contemplating more in line with dependent origination. That's all that's left. It's kind of, actually this kind of topic of dependent origination, this was what Ajahn Mun used to attain arahantship. However, that's not to say that one can't take it up, but if one feels an affinity with the topic of dependent origination, then the usual practice around vipassana topics like this is to learn to cultivate the perception until one's perception of the world becomes seen through the lens of this topic of meditation. So then when one interacts with people, one would see it, say, like less as interacts with the world, one would see it less as kind of, this is a pleasant feeling. Immediately one's mind, if one takes up this topic, one would try to categorize it in terms of dependent origination. In other words, this is a pleasant feeling. Where's the craving? Where's the clinging? Where's the becoming? Until one becomes very skilled at this, then one's mind, one's perceptions operate in line with dependent origination. If one is able to do this, this is basically the method, a method that one uses for almost any vipassana topic, then this becomes the lens through which one sees one's perception of the world, the lens through which one sees the world. And when that happens, when one is able to successfully develop this passion based on this contemplation, it extends to the world as well. It extends to all of samsara. One is able to let go of samsara through these contemplations, through these topics. And this is where there's a sutta where the Buddha talks about one makes a true inference, one makes an inference based on kind of a contemplation one is doing, or based on an insight that one has. That inference extends to samsara. So this is the basic method for vipassana topics. So if one does this skillfully, if one is able to develop dependent origination, one finds one has an inclination, one finds one has an affinity for this topic, and then one develops it well, one can cut one's attachment to this stream of becoming using any of these links, basically. Wherever one finds a weak link, wherever one is able to develop this passion, wherever one is able to cut the chain, then that chain breaks all the links, can break all of the links in the cycle and end the cycle of rebirth. So one of the things with the Buddha's teachings that actually Nyanadeepa Bhante made this point, which was excellent, is that the Buddha was basically an amazing spiritual genius. Kind of, one can even genius might not be a sufficient word. That's why we use this word Buddha. And basically, he has ways of approaching all of reality and dividing it up using many different topics. He divides it up according to the 5 aggregates. He divides it according to the 6 sense bases. Another one that Nyanadeepa Bhante mentioned, he divides it according to the 4 satipatthanas. These include basically everything that one could cognize. And this dependent origination is also another topic, another teaching, which basically includes anything that one could encounter in one's ability to sense or experience the world. So the nice thing about this, the nice thing about the Buddha's genius, is that one doesn't have to basically travel to the end of the world to develop this passion for it. Right here, if one is able to develop this passion for these links, if one is able to see the impermanent, see the suffering, see the not-self, in this process of dependent origination, of one thing depending on another, leading to another, and leading onwards to suffering, then from that one can make this true inference and relinquish one's attachment to samsara. And this is where the link gets broken, where there's no more birth, there's no more aging, sickness, and death, and there's no more suffering. And this is the Buddha's intention in teaching us this, that we might cut these links and realize a state where there's no more birth, aging, and death or suffering. Okay, so leave that for reflection, and hope that everybody has a great day wherever it might be, and wishing you all the blessings of Dhamma practice. Pati Pati Saranai.